being put together by the Center for Climate and Sustainability Empowerment, which is a civil society organization that's into youth-led nonprofits committed to education and then engaging and empowering the youth, especially women, in developing innovative climate solutions in vulnerable communities in Ghana to be able to mitigate or adapt properly to the effects of climate change. Now, in this session, we would have feedback. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
We can hear.
Yes, we can hear you.
We'll have a recap from the last session, which was Tim's session,
Yes,
where
Yeah.
Tim took us through the objectives of the UNFCCC, where he introduced us to the negotiation languages and then the dynamics that climate change negotiation comes with. He also touched base with a bit of the Paris Agreement, and then he went on to the Kyoto Protocol. We also went on to talk about the agenda items to be negotiated at this coming COP28. So at the end of this total session, we would share a recording of all the sessions so that those who missed out on the first session can have the opportunity to recap properly on the sessions that you'd missed. But then I'll advise everybody here to stay tuned, as this promises to be a very educative session for us all. And today's session actually is going to be on
I prepare something.
Hello? Can everybody please mute their mics, please? Once you sign in, kindly mute your mic so we can have a smooth sailing ceremony here. Right, thank you. Okay, so I am back to talking about today's session. I'm going to introduce to you one of our experts, speakers, who is very well respected in the area of climate change issues and its negotiations. He's in the person of Dr. Entwibuisiakon Amwa, who is currently the acting director in charge of climate change, vulnerability and adaptation at the Climate Change Department of Ghana's EPA. He's been working in this environment and climate change space for the past 17 years. So he comes with a wealth of knowledge and information to educate us all here. Dr. Amwa is actually the lead member of Ghana's National Determined Contributions NDC's implementation team. He's also very well deeply involved in the preparations for the communications, biennial updates reports, and all the adaptation communications in Ghana. Currently, he is coordinating and preparing the National Adaptation Plan in Ghana for the project. He is also experienced in climate change negotiator within the UNFCCC process and is currently leads of the G77 in China on the NAP's negotiations. He is also serving on the Climate Change Fund Board as an alternate member for the region. There's so much on his bio. I could go on and on and on and on, but let me shorten this a bit. He is also the climate change capacity building both at the national and sub-national levels. He has led several training and capacity building sessions on climate change for the youth, the private sector, as well as the metropolitan and then municipal and district assemblies within the country. He is also a researcher, a part-time lecturer at the Center for Climate Change and Sustainability Studies. And with a round of keen listening ears, kindly welcome our host and speaker for today, Dr. Impiboisi Akwama.
Thank you so much, Mr. for that long introduction. Maybe I just want to make one clarification or correction on what you just said. Please, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Yes, so
we can hear you.
for the NDC, I am one of the lead members. I'm not the lead. We have a team of people leading together. So I'm not the lead of the NDCs, but I'm part of the lead team for the implementation of the NDCs. That's the one that I wanted to correct. Apart from that, I think it's morning or mid-morning here in Canada. I send my greetings to you. If you permit me, should I share my screen? Because I have been disabled to share. So the host disabled participant can share. If you can allow me to share my screen. Yes, I think it works now.
All right.
Please, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes, please.
Thank you so much. Then welcome again to this section. I think as you indicated, it's going to be let me off my video so that I can have a better bandwidth. It's going to be an education or an educative section. This is not, I just want to indicate that even though the team indicates that the road to COP28 is not a negotiation meeting, and therefore there isn't any position as far as the topic that we are going to discuss is concerned. So just going to provide information for education purposes, and then also to inform those of us who have not had the opportunity to follow this agenda item for some time and are wanting to probably follow or maybe go to the COP to actually have some insights for this topic. I don't know whether the noise is coming from my end or from somebody else, because I can hear some feedback.
Yes, I can hear you too, but I'm sure they'll take care of it in the background.
Okay, thank you so much. So the global goal on adaptation under the Paris Agreement is what I have been asked to talk about. So it is a UNFCCC-led process. That's the starting point. So this track of discussion that we are going to look at is not something outside the domain of the United Nations Framework Convention. It is strictly under the UNFCCC discussion. And within the adaptation negotiation, there are a number of adaptation tracks that are being discussed under the UNFCCC currently. So we have the National Adaptation Plans negotiations as a separate track. We also have the Nairobi Work Program, NWP, also looking at climate vulnerabilities, impact. How do you communicate or make community involvement in this process? So that is what the Nairobi Work Program looks at. There is a discussion also on the Adaptation Fund Board, and so matters related to the Adaptation Fund Board. It's a mixture of finance and then also institutional structures of the Adaptation Fund, its operational status, and so on and so forth. And so that is also an adaptation issue. And then we have, for the past, I think 3-4 years, the GJ also coming on the block. It's been part of the Paris Agreement since its adoption. So since 2015, 2016, the GJ has been, but it was activated live into the negotiation stream in Glasgow. And so it's not too long or too old in the process, but I think it's going to occupy most of the adaptation space in the coming years. Another issue that has a mixture of a number of things, including adaptation, is the LDC matters. That's why you find them outside the box here. So you have LDC matters, which has some issues on adaptation planning, and so on and so forth. So that is something that is discussed. Colonivia Joint Program on Agriculture is a purely agriculture negotiation, but it also has some climate change adaptation implications and other related matters when this subject is also discussed. And then climate finance itself. It's an overarching team that looks at almost everything that is discussed under the UNFCCC, so long as implementation is concerned. Finance comes in handy. And so climate finance comes on board in almost all the things that we talk about, including the financial mechanisms that are under the convention and then the Paris Agreement. So where are we starting from? The DJ mandate, or the context that we're looking at, as I indicated earlier on, it's coming from the Paris Agreement, and it was the first time this topic was included in the mainstream climate change negotiations. You can find that one in Article 7, Paragraph 1 of the Paris Agreement. And what it says is to enhance adaptive capacity, strengthen resilience, and then reduce vulnerability to climate change. So that's Article 7, Paragraph 1. And then it goes on to say that, please, I'm getting a feedback. I don't know whether it's not from my end, obviously. So please, if you can work on that so that our listeners can have a good listening. So
yes,
the aim is to contribute to sustainable development and ensuring an adequate adaptation response in the context of the mitigation goal of keeping temperature rise to a maximum of 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees Celsius. And so this is also something that is linked with the temperature goal. So the overall objective of the Paris Agreement is to actually make sure that we reduce global temperature to the minimum level that can be accommodating for humanity and other ecosystems. And so the agreement says reducing global temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius and pursuing efforts to be able to achieve 1.5 degrees. So that is what the Paris Agreement talks about when it comes to the temperature goal. I just also want to caution that this is a negotiation discussion, so don't expect pictures or anything interesting. Negotiation issues are boring. They are not interesting to look at, and so it's full of tests. But I'm going to make it more. Can we mute our mics? Please, can you hear me?
Yes, please, we can
Yes,
hear
we
you.
can
Okay,
hear you.
so let's move on. Okay, so paragraph 2 of Article 7 says that parties recognize that adaptation is a global challenge faced by all with local, subnational, national, regional, and international dimensions. So you look at the spectrum of communities that are being mentioned in the language. So you're looking at local, you're looking at subnational, you look at national, regional, and international dimensions. And that it is a key component of and makes a contribution to long-term global response to climate change to protect people, livelihood, ecosystems, and it names on and on and on. So after the paragraph 1 talking about reducing vulnerability, building adaptive capacity, and so on and so forth, the paragraph 2 moves on to actually talks about the dimensions that the communities, the state, the actors that come on board when it comes to the adaptation discussion. I also want to indicate from the start that one of the key objectives of this global goal on adaptation in the Paris Agreement is a developing country thing. The idea that emanated this article in the Paris Agreement was coming from the fact that from the developing countries' perspective, adaptation as at now, or at the time the Paris Agreement was being developed or constructed, adaptation had not had the kind of global visibility compared to mitigation. In terms of reporting and standardization, mitigation is way ahead and very advanced in the UNFCCC process. And so parties felt that if we have an opportunity to come out with a new agreement, then it's imperative for us to also position adaptation to a context that it will get the needed traction and then visibility in terms of progress, in terms of activities on the ground, in terms of reporting. And so this is one of the thinkings behind this article. That I was in the room when this discussion actually came up. So you move on to paragraph 3 that talks about adaptation efforts of developing country parties shall be recognized in accordance with the modalities to be adopted by the Conference of Parties. So everything that this article seeks to do is going to be organized under the modalities of the Conference of Parties. So it is not going to be done outside the convention and its Paris Agreement. And so everything is going to be under the guidance of the COP. And since it was adopted, the Paris Agreement was adopted, the implementation of it was very quiet and silent until Glasgow. And so for parties to be able to understand and then implement this Article 7.1, there was a need to give it a negotiation spotlight. So in Glasgow, there was a work program. And that work program, so to better understand, conceptualize, and ultimately achieve this work program, countries that were signatories to the Paris Agreement collectively under the CMA is what? Conference of Parties serving as the meeting of the parties to the Paris Agreement. It's a long one. That's why we avoid going through them. We just say CMA. If you look at the CMP, it's also a similar thing. The CMP is under the Kyoto Protocol. The CMA is for the Paris Agreement. And then the COP is for the convention. And so this was created, and it was a 2-year mandated program under the Paris Agreement. The decision that was given in Glasgow stipulated that, among other things, The 2-year program will be carried out by subsidiary bodies for scientific and technological advice, in short, SOBSTA, and then also subsidiary body for implementation, SBI in short. And the 2-year technical bodies, and the 2 technical bodies that support the CMA with the support from the UNFCCC Secretariat. So what it means here is that this agenda item is a joint agenda item, meaning that it is going to be under the supervision of the SBI and then also the SOBSTA, with the Secretariat naturally, obviously, providing Secretariat support to the implementation. But then everything that is decided or discussed under this agenda item must receive the approval of the CMA. In this case, the CMA is the highest decision-making body in that regard. So the GLASS work program had 8 workshops that was mandated by the decision in Glasgow. So 4 workshops were to be held in 2022, and then 4 workshops were to be held in 2023. The topics that were supposed to be, or the themes that are supposed to be discussed, will be determined by what? The SBI chair and then also the SOBSTA chair, based on consultations with parties and other groups. So the discussions of the various topics are under the guidance of the SB chairs. If you go to Article 7, paragraph 4, it indicates that parties recognize that the current need for adaptation is significant and that greater levels of mitigation can reduce the need for the additional adaptation effort, and that greater adaptation need can involve greater adaptation cost. And so the paragraph 5 is what I call the foundation of the complexity of this subject matter that is being discussed. If you carefully read the paragraph 5 of the Article 7, it's talking about the fact that parties acknowledge that adaptation action should follow a country-driven. So 1, it's looking at, it has to be country-driven. 2, gender responsive. 3, participatory. 4, fully transparent approach, taking into consideration vulnerable groups, communities, ecosystems, and should be based on and guided by best available science as appropriate. And it also includes traditional knowledge, knowledge of indigenous people, and local knowledge systems, with a view to integrating adaptation into relevant socioeconomic and environmental policies and actions. Well, so it means it's everything. If you had carefully looked at this language, it's saying everything to nothing. And this is where the confusion is, because it means that the design, the interpretation of the DJA has to be taken into consideration of all these things that I just mentioned. And so it is country-driven. It has to be participatory, which UNFCCC processes are always participatory, it's fine. It has to look at indigenous knowledge, communities, looking at, so it's everything in short. And so how do you design a framework by taking into account all these elements that I've just mentioned without compromising on the importance of one to the other? So I have a question here. How do we design a global pact or framework for adaptation that will be acceptable to all parties and other stakeholders, taking into account the diverse and context-specific nature of adaptation? Those of you who have been able to follow the DJA discussions, if you move into any discussion, there are so many things that comes from different angles. I was in a session here yesterday that started talking about picking slowly, and then you realize that you end up talking about everything that is adaptation. And so that is the complexity that the GJA faces. The mandated workshops, so far, all of them had been conducted, 8 of them. I don't have the topic for the 8th one. I didn't check about that because I was not able to attend that one. But the other 7 that have been done, the first one was about the nature and characteristics of the global goal. The second workshop focused on good practice for goal setting across different contexts. The third one looked at general understanding of relevant matrices, indicators, and targets. And then the 4th workshop was mainly focusing on adaptation, financing, or support for adaptation. Workshop 5 looked at reporting on adaptation efforts. And then workshop 6 looked at linkages of the work under the GJ to other conventions and then other frameworks. For example, the global stock take, and then other related mechanisms. And then also the 7th workshop was looking at the relationship of the global goal to the global stock take. So there are different themes that have been discussed for the last 2 years. But you should note that all these have their individual reports or summary reports. But then there's going to be one composite synthesized report that is going to be ready before COP28 for a decision to be taken in COP28 on the GJ. So what has been discussed so far? Because it's a lot, there are 8 workshops, I can't have the opportunity to go through all of them. I'll take the opportunity to just talk about where it started, which is the foundation of all these workshops. Because once you understand the first workshop, that is the scene setting of the other following workshops. You can find time and then read about the reports. The reports are available at the UNFCCC website. You can get all of them to read. So the first workshop was held from 8th to 9th June 2022. And it was under the theme, Enhancing Understanding of the Global Goal and Reviewing Progress Towards It. And this topic, since it was the first workshop, was very appropriate. Why? Because parties actually had this 7.1 without actually understanding how it can be conceptualized. Didn't understand how it can be easily be implemented. And therefore, there was a need for parties to have a conceptual discussion on what this article looks like and how it's going to evolve within the adaptation space. And so that was the topic. And then it had 3 main discussion questions. One was, how can the GJ be conceptualized? So if you want to understand, if you say global goal, how can it be conceptualized? Parties and then other stakeholders had the opportunity to give their understanding, their views from different perspectives, what they understand by the global goal. So a lot of discussions ensued at the initial stage to probably conceptualize this topic and then make it a negotiated item. The other question was looking at what are the examples of good practices of goal setting at different levels in other relevant fora. So this was also looking at good practices, and then also how do we set goals. Obviously, we're talking about global goal, and from your readings, anything that is a goal has an objective. So you are trying to be able to achieve a certain landmark, and that's why it's a goal. And so there's obviously a need as at the beginning point to be able to know some goal settings that happens in different levels. I think the first workshop report is very important. And so if you find time, you can read that particular report. I have some excerpts for you for this discussion, but then you can take the time to read the full report and then the other subsequent reports. The discussion on the conceptualization of the GJ also included themes of principles, components, characteristics, skills and thresholds, linkages, methods, and approaches. And if you had the opportunity to attend any of these sessions, you could see that it was a discussion of almost everything. And so people were throwing in ideas. It was a brainstorming sessions that had the opportunity to let people have understanding and then opening up to other things and trying to link these issues to other existing frameworks that can help parties to be able to come out with a decision test that will be workable for all parties. Remember, this process is a party-driven process. And at the end of the day, they had some conclusions from the workshop. I'll find time to take you through them because they are very important. The first conclusion is that from that workshop, they are saying that, and here is parties and other stakeholders. So the GJ should align with the principles of the convention and the Paris Agreement. So the take-home assignment here is that every discussion that is going to be under the GJ should be within the principles of the convention and the Paris Agreement. Those of us who are maybe new in this process, it is the convention that gave birth to all the other protocols and then agreements. So the convention is the mother instrument. And out of the convention, we have had the Kyoto Protocol, and then we're now having the Paris Agreement. And so anything that is going to be discussed must not detach itself from the convention, the key principles of the convention. So that is one of the key things that at the initial brainstorming session, it was actually highlighted. They were also looking at the fact that these discussions has to be taken on board challenges that are faced by adaptation globally. If you take the local level, the subnational level, the national, the issues that I mentioned them earlier on at 7.2 were re-echoed in the discussions by parties. The second point of the key conclusions from the workshop was the fact that they were looking at Article 7.14, which looks at of the Paris Agreement, and it's supposed to be the central component of the GJ. These include recognizing that adaptation effort of developing countries, enhancing the implementation of adaptation action, reviewing the adequacy and effectiveness of adaptation action and support, and reviewing the overall progress towards achieving the GJ. So if you look at this language carefully, what it's saying is that all the efforts of developing countries' adaptation must be recognized. How do you recognize it? And that has been the subject of discussion since Glasgow. They are also saying that the implementation of the GJ should enhance adaptation action at the local level, at the national level, and also at the global level. From time to time, we have to have the opportunity under this GJ to review how adequate these efforts are, and then how effective these actions are. Not only the actions, but also the support. When we say support, largely finance, technology, and then capacity. And so how are these being effective and adequate in supporting the achievement of the global goal? And from time to time, we need to also review progress how far have we come? And it is important to, so this was just right from the initial stages. So you could see that the first workshop had very good start on the discussions of the GJ. The third element that came out of that workshop was the fact that the key characteristics of the responses to the GJ are that they should be long-term rather than only an urgent and immediate response. So we are looking at adaptation responses from medium to long term. We should move away from urgent and immediate adaptation responses. That means that we should move away from emergency responses. We should look at adaptation as a long-term thing, and we should have better plans to be able to, which means that this is actually being informed from moving away from NAPAS, which is the National Adaptation Plan of Actions, into NAPS, which is adaptation planning, which looks at long-term. And so that is highly reflected here. They are also saying that this issue, you meet it often and often. It's supposed to be country-driven and then reflect national context. No two ways about that. It has to be holistic, comprehensive, and reflecting transboundary and cascading climate impact and risk. This is also one of the challenges. Should we be able to have a decision in COP28 in terms of, people are talking of targets, people are talking of matrices, people are talking of indicators. We'll come to that in this discussion. How would transboundary adaptation risk and impact be measured? Of course, it's important to recognize cascading effects of these vulnerabilities because it has different levels of layers of implications or impact on development and humanity. And therefore, it's important to be able to take note of that. The question is, in terms of measurement and recognition and reporting, how do you do that? Which country would do that? How are you going to stagger the efforts in your reporting? Should that become accepted? And so these are some of the things that they were able to highlight. And they talked about youth, women, vulnerable groups. The things that somebody would say the obvious culprits, they are already in the test. And they are saying that the target should be reviewed after each GST. So if they are able to get targets adopted in the next COP, these targets are not going to be stagnant. They are going to be work in progress. And so every 5 years, when we do the global stock take, then these targets must also be reviewed. This is what the initial discussions talked about. The other one that we are having here talks about the GJ could have several targets. And this target, we are looking at global level, regional, national, and then local. And so this is the starting point of the other workshop that I've been talking about targets. So this is actually emanating from the first workshop. In fact, parties and other stakeholders had the opportunity to see other frameworks that indicators and targets have been talked about. There are several of them. The United Nations Development Program, the UNDP, the UNEP, the UNDR, so many structures and frameworks. They had opportunity to present how these targets and the indicators that they have been working with. And so this is the starting point of that. So you're looking at global, regional, and then national, then local. The discussion of existing practices of, I'm taking time to take you through this because all the other subsequent workshops are just building up on these issues that I'm talking about. And so the first workshop is very important. So they are also talking about frameworks like the SGDs. They are also looking at the Sendai frameworks and then some other reporting lines like the adaptation communications. So these things Some of them are UN-led processes, others are outside the UN processes. And they are being mentioned in the first workshop. Then the sixth one has to do with relevant example of targets and goals at different levels, provided a wealth of examples from different countries and sectors that could be relevant to the GJ. So we come back and they were giving examples of how do you set global targets. People were talking about examples like 1 billion people protected by early warning systems, financial, the amount of money that flows into adaptation actions, a cost of maybe remedying some adaptation impact and so on and so forth. If it is water, it can be measured in cubic meters and so on and so forth. In fact, there are a number of examples that they talked about. When it comes to plans and policies, the number of policies, plans that have been developed and being implemented by countries can also be quantitative targets. So they're looking at indicators that are quantitative and then also and global in nature. So these are some of the key conclusions that came from the workshop. And as I said, the other workshops are building upon these conclusions. So the insight from parties illustrates a wide variety of possibilities in developing the GJ. So from what I've just said, you can see that designing
I don't know whether it's from their
Also,
side or from this side.
they should have.
Okay. Maybe na meeting Kasan, but
hello, can we go on? Just want to be sure, can you see my screen? Because somebody says FEMA.
Yes, sir. Please, we
Yes,
can
Doc,
see.
we can see.
No, we can
Yes.
see. We can see.
Okay.
Yes, we
Wonderful.
can see the screen. I can see actually.
So the insight from these parties, as I just indicated, gives you a wide variety of possibilities that can be used. And so what was the outcome of the GJ at COP27? So fast forwarding, because I don't want to go into the workshops as I mentioned. So last year we had 4 workshops, and based on the initial workshops, the 4 workshops, we're able to get some decision. In fact, that decision came with a lot of hesitance and difficulty, but at least some call it a compromise decision. But whatever name you give it to it, there was a decision at COP27, which we are building on to have a final decision for the development of the framework. So paragraph 7 of the decision, of which is CMA 4, is saying the following. So parties recognize that adaptation is a global challenge faced by all with local, subnational. So remember, this language was one of the things that we talked about in the main conclusions that the first workshop or the other workshops talked about. So that has been captured in the draft decision. Sorry, in the decision CMA 4, sorry. And then the next paragraph was the actual decision, which says that parties decide to initiate the development of a framework for the GJA to be undertaken through a structured approach. And that word is underlined. So that process that is going to go through, or we are going through, is a structured approach and it's under the glass. And so all the workshops that are going to be organized or that have been organized this year, the 4 of them, are through a structured approach. And it's containing elements that we had earlier on that we talked about. So with all these workshops, we are expecting that in November, December this year, or December, we'll have a decision. That decision is going to be informed by the 8 workshops that had been organized throughout the 2 years. Then the paragraph 9 continues to say that parties also decide that the framework referred to in paragraph 8 above will guide the achievement of the GJ and the review of the overall progress. So once a framework is developed and accepted, it is going to be the guiding framework for the achievement of progress in measuring and assessing impacts, in looking at risk and vulnerabilities, all those things that are associated with climate change impact. And so that, and not only that, but also how support for adaptation can be measured and enhanced. So once that framework is adopted, it means it is going to support parties to be able to achieve a number of things going into the future. And then paragraph 10 of the decision 4 CMA4 talks about parties also decide that a framework through a structured approach to paragraph 8 above may take into consideration the following inter alia. So we're looking at the dimensions, and these are some of the things that the workshops have been talking about. So the dimensions, it has to be iterative. I've heard a number of times that people are talking about adaptation policy cycle. It wasn't a decision. It's a language that people made it up. The decision said adaptation cycle. There's nothing like adaptation policy cycle that people have been talking about. I don't know where that came from. And it has become so popular in the discussions, in the workshops that we have been engaging this year. What the decision talked about is adaptation cycle. And it makes sense because in the cycle, you're looking at what? The assessment, you're looking at the planning phase, you're looking at the implementation phase, you're looking at the learning, and then the evaluation phase. So it's an iterative cycle as it's being given to us by the LDC's or the leg guidance for adaptation planning. And so that is what, in terms of dimensions, we are looking at. The decision also talked about themes. So we can look at adaptation from different themes. So water, food, agriculture, cities, settlements, health, infrastructure, livelihood, name them. So that we can also be looking at it from that angle. And then it also looks at the cross-sectoral nature of adaptation. So the gender dimension, the participatory nature, the transboundary nature, the transparency issues, the human rights aspects, the nature-based solution, all these things, indigenous knowledge, they have boxed all of them here. And that decision also recognizes that. And then the decision also went ahead and then also named or listed some sources of information where these sources can be helpful in the design of the framework. And so we talked about reports of parties in the various forms, in the various communications. Talks about the IPCC report and quite a number of them, but about 10 or different sources. But note that the decision lists a number of information sources, including submissions by parties and non-state actors. Submissions form one of the key foundations of the UNFCCC process. Anytime we want to get views of parties on a particular subject matter, one of the key things that the UNFCCC does, or the COP does, or any of the bodies does, is to invite submissions from parties. Here, you're able to get divergent views from different stakeholders and parties to be able to inform the subject matter. And so submissions are a very important part of the UNFCCC process. We continue with paragraph 11 of the decision. So that decision also talks about to review the framework and then make sure that it goes in line with the global stocktake. Remember, this was also one of the reflections that came about in the workshops. And so it is captured here. So from time to time, what the framework must be informing the global stocktake. We need to also review, because the global stocktake is being done every 5 years. And so it's important this is also done. Paragraph 12 talks about that 4 workshops. For this one, I don't think it's important to, because I've already talked a lot about that. But the 20 request the chairs of the subsidiary bodies to select the team. So as I indicated, the teams are not just coming from anybody else, but they are guided by a decision. And the decision in COP27 actually guided the kind of teams that will be used for the workshops in 2023. And so about 7 or 8 of them had been listed here, which informed the various teams that had been talked about this year. So the question is, sorry. So what are some of, my screen is misbehaving here, sorry. Yeah. So from all the workshops that had been held this year, a number of sticking points have come up. They've talked about indicators, they talked about teams, talked about matrices. Indicators are not the same as sometimes the same as matrices. Sometimes matrix can be a subset of an indicator, depending on what you're looking at. And so we're talking of approaches, we're talking of target setting, talking of adaptation cycle. You see, I have put the policy into quotation marks because it's not something that I agree to. But that's one of the things that has been talked about widely this year. We're talking about reporting and its related capacities. And then we're also talking about the temporal and spatial scale of adaptation interventions. Quite a number of things have not been listed here, but these are the key ones. And so if you want to set targets, let's say indicators, for example, or targets and then matrices. The discussion had been at what level are we setting the indicators or targets? Is it global, national, local, or all of them? And what would be the scope of these targets that we are talking about? Should we just focus on themes such as water, energy, health, and so on and so forth? Or what should we do? When it comes to the adaptation policy cycle, or the adaptation cycle, it has different levels. You have the planning phase, you have the assessment phase, you have the implementation phase, you have the evaluation and learning phase. At each level, what can we do with these indicators and targets and matrices? I think it's one of the things that, and then the fact that impacts sometimes can be temporal in terms of time. You can see something that manifesting today, and probably tomorrow its manifestation will be different. So if you are setting targets, if you are setting an indicator for such an event or an activity, how sure are we going to be? Based on which assumptions can we be able to do this and do it right? What we are saying today about maybe flooding in Accra, how is it going to look like, let's say, in terms of the next 4 or 5 years? If you don't have the proper projections and then also science to support this decision, you may be able to miss the target or miss the indicators. And so, and in terms of the fact that some of these impacts are also moving from one space to another, can we just focus on urban areas? And for all you know, in the next 5 years, things are going to be shifted towards another area that we are not too sure of. So there are a number of things that are bringing the controversies. But we are looking forward to a very good decision in UAE. But know that all these things that we are talking about, we are not ready now to go back and just have. So when we go into United Arab Emirates, we are not going to go back and then have conceptual discussions. We have gone past that. What is the meaning of the GJ? What is resilience? These conceptual discussions have already been packed. And so things must be focused and then be well directed to things that will give us a better framework as we go into COP28. So coming together, close my presentation. I just want to indicate that, yes, the glass has fulfilled its mandate. So far, the 8 workshops have been organized. We are waiting for the final report, the final composite report for all these 8 workshops. There are still divergent views on themes, indicators, targets, matrices, and what will be the fate of the development of the GA framework at COP28 with what has been happening so far. Because in my thinking, since January 2023, we've been going in circles on almost the same thing in almost all the workshops. Are we going to be able to make history in COP28 with this limited time that we have to get something that is formidable? Looking at all the many things that they want the GGA to cover, are we going to get a decision that, remember, technical discussions are entirely different from negotiations. The negotiations has different levels. You have the technical negotiations, which are informed by blocks and parties' interests. And then you also have political level, which also has a different dimension altogether. Will this different dimensions speak to each other for a unit song so that we can have a decision in COP28? So what, from my view or from your side, will be the expectations for a progressive GG beyond COP28? So thank you so much for your attention.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. NP. We are grateful for your insights in there. I've been schooled. I'm sure all of our audience have also been schooled. The takeaway for me here is that the global goal adaptation is just like the weather. It is complex with a lot of variations with the various ecosystems that exist. And so we need tailor-made solutions to achieve this global goal. Thank you so much, Doctor. I think now I'm sure the audience are ready with their questions. I asked that people post their questions and answers here. I haven't seen any yet, but maybe people want to ask in person. So if you have a question, kindly just raise your hand on the portal, and then we'll give you the opportunity to ask your questions.
So maybe as a teacher, when you finish teaching and there's no question, there are two
It
things.
means you did a good job.
No, not that.
Esther,
Not
I
that.
think
Hold on. It's either you confuse your listeners that they didn't understand anything, or or you are able to convince them entirely, and therefore there was no any other further issue for
I
clarification.
think there's,
Yeah, there's a
Doc,
hand
please,
up.
I think there's a hand up. Yeah.
There's a hand up. Am I not seeing?
So that person can unmute and then talk. Yeah. But you have to
Okay,
introduce
thank you.
yourself.
Okay, thank you very much, Doc. Yes, my name is Antonio Tokokuzi. Yes, and I must say that the presentation was really insightful. Also, during the introduction, I think they made mention of the fact that you are one of the lead members for the implementation of Ghana's NDCs. And since we normally have the topic every 5 years, I want to find out how, at the local and national level, we are able to do some topic to see whether or not we are on track. So that's my question. How do we find out if we are on track as regards our own NDCs?
Esther, if I can take maybe a number of questions and then I can respond to them.
Yes, yes. Okay. So let's see the next question. I don't see any other question. Is there a hand up?
Yes, my hand is up.
Yeah, yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Very insightful presentation, Dr. Kwesiako. I wanted to ask two quick questions. So with GJ, like you rightly put it, it looks quite complex, and a whole lot of discussions are going on around it. Even with a lot of criticisms about its ability to come into being, if I can put it that way. From your own experience, have you heard some of these criticisms, and who are the ones really saying GJ is not possible? And then my second question is Ghana really, looking at our reporting systems and all that, and your experience being in this process, your extensive experience, do you think we have reporting lines that we can effectively contribute to the GJ process and tracking as a country? Thank you.
All right, there's another question from Tim, and it says, to what extent do we think tensions in the GAA has been related to the definition of a global goal? For example, was there a concern from developed countries of global making them responsible for providing funding to developing countries for meeting this goal?
Okay, maybe I'll start with the ones that I've already collected, and then if there are any other further hands, we can look at them. You can also go through the chat, Esther, and then see if there are some other questions that you can alert me to.
Yes,
to respond to. So I'll start with the last one. About attention. Is there attention on the framing or the definition of the GJA, and whether the developed country parties were consulted, or maybe they accepted this framework to be working on, and for the fact that maybe we need finance or support from their side to implement it. I think anything that is under the convention, if it is under implementation within the UNFCCC, has a way to go about it, and there's a clear definition about who does what in this process. When it comes to support, you take the convention. The convention has languages as to who is supposed to provide what. In fact, most of the obligations when it comes to financing and then technology and capacity, because of historical responsibility when the convention was being developed. If you look at the Kyoto Protocol and then the convention, they have similar languages in terms of obligation, has some responsibilities to the developed country parties. And so, yes, obligation for providing support for adaptation financing under the convention has to come from developed country parties. If you come to the Paris Agreement, which has a watered down language in terms of support, even under that, the developed country parties will take the lead as is indicated in the Paris Agreement, and then invite other parties who are able to do so, who are in the capacity to do so, to provide support. So the first line of obligation when it comes to financing adaptation or climate-related action, it's under the developed country parties. If you look at the financial mechanisms or institutions that have been set up by the convention and then the Paris Agreement, the capitalization of these funds, the Green Fund, the Adaptation Fund, VNGF and its related organisms, the SCF, the LDCF, all these funds under the convention are supposed to be capitalized by developed country parties. And this is where the support is coming from. So yes, adaptation support, whether it's for GJA or any other adaptation related issues, finance must flow from developed country parties and to developing country parties. So that is the response. That does not take away, there's a caveat here, the obligation, the responsibility. Sometimes people confuse what happens within the UNFCCC process with what others can do by themselves. If you are going by the tenets and then the rules and then the principles of the convention and then the Paris Agreement, there is a clear line as to who is supposed to provide financing for action on the ground. It doesn't also stop other countries to do better things for themselves, for their countries, when they are called to do so. And so that is what I wanted to. For tension, there has always no topic in this discussion under the convention up to today. Even the Paris Agreement itself, there was tension. The adoption of the Paris Agreement was surrounded with a number of tensions. There are a number of decisions that have been adopted that face major oppositions from either parties, either from developed parties or from developing parties. So discussions under the UNFCCC have not been running away from tensions. So tensions are normal things. The important thing is to get within the or amidst the tension, you are able to frame what you want and you're able to meet consensus, because decision making in the UNFCCC is based on consensus. How you can actually cross boundaries and be able to sell your positions to the other parties for them to be able to side with you amidst hesitance. And that is very normal, because you don't expect 196 countries or so to always be agreeing to everything together. Even in your family, where you have about 3 or 4 people, there are always dissenting views on issues. And so these things are normal. So that's what I want to say about that question. On Portia's question, she had 2 questions. In terms of reporting lines, I don't think for us, for now, as a country, Ghana, there are some mandates in terms of reporting lines as far as the development of the GJA is concerned, because most of the discussions and then the inputs are taken at the regional level. So the ILAC, they have their block. The African group, they have the AGN doing the science and trying to, of course, we have negotiated from different countries under the AGN supporting this process. I have the Middle East countries also having their block. So these inputs are not country-based. The submissions can be done country by country. So if there's any submission or reporting line that was supposed to, it was the submissions that parties and groups of parties were supposed to do, which AGN has done on behalf of the country. The other question that Dr. Adade talked about is about criticisms and then possibilities. I think this is also linked to the earlier one that I responded to. And maybe I'll tie in with that one, because unless maybe I didn't get your question clearly, because criticisms has always been part of anything that comes up. And if you allow me, I can actually list a number of things that had issues. Even Article 6, 6.2, 6.4 itself, even the CDM itself, when it started, had a number of issues. But as parties move on with these issues, they become maybe acceptable to some extent. And so criticisms are normal. As a negotiator, I have seen a lot of them. For the GJA, it has been always the case from the beginning. And I don't want to, because I want to be very technical here, I don't want to sound a negotiator in this case, because there are positions. And sometimes people can even align to certain things that they don't even know what they are aligned to. And that's one of the challenges of the negotiation. So I think that is fine. Antonio was talking about national stock take. Very important. Tracking the NDCs. As we speak now, we have tracking instruments for the NDC actions that annually we know how well we are doing with the NDCs. And this can be aggregated in terms of the actions on the ground, in terms of support received, support requested, and so on and so forth. All these things are being tracked. There's a tracking tool for the NDC actions, which will be part of the national communications that and then we also do, we used to do biannual update report. Now it is an enhanced, there's another reporting line that's similar to the biannual, and then the national communication, which will be capturing all these efforts that the country has been doing. It wouldn't be a bad idea if we can actually make it a culture to have national stakeholder engagement and dissemination workshops about how well we are doing. Of course, these things are very expensive to do, but I think it would be a good thing, something that we can do as a country. So I think those are the responses that came in the first round.
Right. Thank you so much, Doctor. So our next line of questions, we have one question from Patience. And her question is, from the country perspective, what should the global goal on adaptation look like? I think maybe from the Ghanaian perspective. Then I'll move on to the next question. I'll read about.
Sorry, if I can just add to that.
Come again, Patience.
If I can just add to the question, if you
Okay.
don't mind.
Yes,
Okay,
please
so
go
thank
ahead.
you very much for the great presentation, Doc. You mentioned clearly that one of the contestations so far on the GGA has been how do you deliver a pact that is suitable for all parties, looking at the different socioeconomic and different vulnerabilities that different countries have. So in your position, the work that you do as part of the AGN and also at G77 plus China, and also being the lead on adaptation in Ghana, for us as African countries, as a bloc, what would a good goal on the what will a good goal on the global goal adaptation look like for us as a continent? What decision or what paths are we going to be satisfied with that meets our vulnerability and our special needs as a continent?
Right. Thank you, Patience, for the clarification.
Okay, so I think that's all, or there's any other hand?
There are more questions.
Okay, so then let me
So
take.
the next question, it says, what are the key priorities and criteria that should guide the how the GGA should be operationalized and measured? And then also, are there agreed methods or metrics to assess the progress? That's another. And I think the next one is, how far has Ghana come with the last negotiations we made? Have we as the nation made any good impact from what we had the last time? That's one question from Mr. Mwaku. And then the next one. Okay, are students allowed to partake in the COP? So I think I'll pause here and then have you respond to these questions, and we'll collate our next round of questioning. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much all for the questions. Obviously, I'll start from the last one so that I don't forget. So are students allowed? The easiest question so far. Yes, everybody is allowed to attend the COP. There are processes or procedures to attend a COP. You have to be registered either through the national system or by civil society organization or by a media constituency. There are different registration lines. And so whichever line that you think you fit to register, because you need to be accredited first to be able to, attend to these meetings. So first of all, you need to look at how can I get registered? And so the government delegates are registered by government institutions, coordinated by the EPMST. There are also civil society lines that they have their registration lines. They have media, and then also other UN bodies, researchers. So there are different badges. So you have yellow badge, you have blue badge, you have green badge, you have red badge, and so on and so forth. So all these badges have different lines of accreditation. And so once you want to attend, you have to look at which one do you belong and then activate that process. Secondly, you have to have your funding available, because everybody that goes to the COP must get funding before you can travel, because you need your air ticket in and out, you need your accommodation. Once there, depending on how long you are going to stay, some stay for 1 week, others stay for 2 weeks. If you are part of the preparatory team, even more than 2 weeks. All these go with money, and therefore you need to be funded. There is this general impression that government fund people to COP. It's a lie. Whoever told you that, it's a lie. I have been in this process for quite a number of years. I'm a government delegate. I don't get my funding from government. I get my funding from other sources. And I know that a number of these government delegates from different institutions have their funding from different sources. So what you have to do first is to look for where you can get funding. If you're lucky and you have money, your parents have money, or you yourself have money, that you're going to find yourself. That's the easiest. And so that's what I can say. So students are allowed to participate in these meetings. How far have we come since the last COP? I don't know whether this Amwako is the Mr. Kinsler Amwako that I know who asked this question. Yeah. But that said, so when decisions are made in COPs or Conference of Parties, the implementation is at the local level. There are no decisions that are made specific to specific countries. In science, in projection, that what we call about downscaling. So you have to downscale this high-level decisions that are made at the COP, and then make them fit into your national structures and systems. And so for GJA, it's yet being discussed. It hasn't been actually adopted. We are still under the conceptualization and then target development and metrics. We just want to understand and have a framework in place. COP27 made a move to get a framework design started or adopted. It is a shelf. It needs to be packed with different elements as to how it can be able to support itself once it's adopted. And that is where we are. It's not a Ghana case. It is a global case. Ghanaians have made their input in various forms. Normally, people think that when we say Ghana, it is only the government institutions. The researchers, the media groups, and then other consultants who are not in the mainstream government are all Ghanaians with government badges for these meetings. And so they go on the ticket of the government to support the country's effort to contribute into these discussions. And so there are different efforts or different support coming from different institutions that are supporting this process. I think that is what I can say about that. I'm not sure that's the best answer, but that's what I can say on that one. On the key priorities, and then in terms of criteria, remember this is a negotiated item. As I indicated earlier on, there were other frameworks that had the opportunity to make presentations. So now, if you want to assess global impact of adaptation, as a scientist, what will I look for? And this, I take myself out of the negotiation angle and then stand as a researcher myself. Probably because of the global nature of these activities, I have to unpack the issues. We're talking of vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities is a vague word. It has different connotations and different dimensions. I need to first of all understand what kind of vulnerabilities are applicable in my context, in this case, Ghana. Even Ghana is not a homogeneous entity. We have different ecological zones, different people in different places. And so we need to understand at the country level what kind of, because the vulnerabilities at the coast are different from maybe the middle belt and then also the dryland conditions. Sometimes you can have some of these commonalities that run through the country. The urban vulnerabilities must be different from the rural vulnerabilities. And so we need to be able to understand, because what if you are building indicators, indicator for what? Indicators are built not in vacuum. They are built to address specific issues. And so it is important for us to be able to understand these issues. And so we can unpack it at the subnational level and then also come to the national level, the sector level, and then also pick maybe issue by issue. That's why it's very complicated to be able to do with this issue, but it is doable. You are not going to be able to do everything. You can look at it from project or program based. You can look at it from activity based. we can look at it from other angles. People are talking of high-level indicators, and then you leave the details for the countries and then the other communities to deal with the details. So, for example, if there's flooding in Ghana, how many people were affected? This is a high-level indicator. How many households or houses were destroyed? How much infrastructure, if you can quantify it, were affected? In terms of climate change and health or air pollution, people who are reporting of maybe heat rashes and maybe other diseases associated with pollution. You can use hospital information and data. You can actually conduct surveys and talk to people. It's a lot of work. And this is what the scientists do to be able to gather this information. And you can aggregate this information to some extent at a national level. And then this can feed into the global picture. And this is what some people are actually talking about. There are others that are saying that, okay, apart from this, some of the information are so qualitative that it's very difficult to actually quantify. But so this is, so I don't have a pinned down criteria as my best. What I want to emphasize here is the fact that every country has its unique characteristics. And we should be doing this because we do national adaptation reporting, we do national communications. There are very key information that we report on as countries. Can some of this information be aggregated at a global level? If yes, let's do that. Are there still gaps? If there are gaps, can we also do maybe more surveys or more research to close these gaps going forward in future? So there's always a starting point. It is not something that is not undoable. It can be done if parties want it to happen. But the challenge is the fact that I've coordinated G77 for so many years. It's sometimes even within the developing countries among ourselves, there are varied interests. And so it's always even difficult to even have an agreed position, even among your own constituency. And so these are some of the challenges. But even if I have my criteria, it might not go anywhere. I can actually input into the discussion. As to whether it will be accepted or not, it's a different thing. Normally, group positions are stronger. The AGN can push. Most of the good things that have happened in adaptation space come from the AGN. And so the AGN can push and it can work. And likewise, the other blocks can also push. And we see how it goes. Should the GJ in Ghana contest or what should the, okay, so Patience, you were asking what would be a good GJ like for the African continent? That's a good question. So in Africa, being an African, I think that we cannot leave these issues without targets, without some matrices, without some indicators, especially when it comes to support, some key vulnerabilities and challenges, some key themes that we are affected with. So Africa wants to see some high-level indicators and targets and matrices to start with, so that we can be able to measure, because the idea of this whole GJ in the convention, in the Paris Agreement, is to actually measure progress and then make adaptation visible within the climate space. And so if we are not going to be able to report on anything, then it means we have achieved nothing. So there's always a starting point, and the African continent wants to see some high-level indicators and targets to start with. So that's what I will tell you from my perspective. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. MP, for those responses. I'm sure we are all learning. So we have an in-person question from Emanuela. Emanuela, kindly unmute your mic and then take the floor.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity. And Doc, thank you for the wonderful submissions. I've learned a lot from this discussion. A follow-up to what you just discussed about, the African continent and the continent-specific, targets and all that concerning the DGA. I want to know if during the African Climate Week, anything specific or any specific outcomes came out from the summit concerning the GGA? That's my first question. And also, secondly, when you were talking about the conclusions on the first workshop that was held, you made mention of the Sendai framework, the fact that every discussion should be in line with the principles in that. I don't have any idea on it, so could you please just briefly give a background on what the framework is about? Thank you.
Okay, so quickly, this time I'll take them as quickly as so that sometimes I lose some of the questions when there are too many. So on the first one, the first one was what? Sorry.
It was concerning the African Climate Weekend.
Okay. Yeah.
Special discussions
so there was a communique that the African presidents or African heads of states or the organizers came out with. And if you look at the communique, the GGA is clearly stated. So you can look for the communique and then read it yourself. The GGA is clearly indicated. The African presidents or African heads of state have indicated what they want. They talked about high-level targets. They want some indicators and so on and so forth. So it is in the communique that was that came out of the African summit. Remember, that summit is a high-level summit, and therefore you don't expect very details about some of these issues. But the good thing is that the African, the AU uses the AGN, and so anything through the African Ministers for Environment, anything that the African heads of states want to communicate in terms of technical issues, they use the AGN as their technical mouthpiece for these discussions. And so whatever the AGN is talking about is from the African heads of states in this regard. The other one has to do with what was that?
It was on the Sendai
the Sendai framework. Yeah, so you're talking about the Sendai framework. So if you look at the discussions that went on, it was saying that the formulation or the development of the framework must take lessons or must be informed by other frameworks. And therefore, there are a number of frameworks. There are under other institutions that are doing certain things that talks about targets and maybe frameworks and then also indicators. We talked about the Sustainable Development Goal, which has 17 or 16 goals or 17 goals with a number of targets that the SGDs look at and track. So the whole lesson was that, yes, the GGA can also learn some lessons from that. The Sendai framework actually focuses on disaster. At first, it was Hugo framework. It has been updated to Sendai. These names are countries or states where these policies are adopted. So Sendai is one of the cities in Japan. And this is where this document was. It is mainly for disaster risk reduction and management. And it looks at disasters, where they come from, how they can be handled pre, during, and then post. And then, so there are indicators that these disaster frameworks also look at. And so all what this discussion was saying that we can also go and then look at what is in the Sendai framework. There are certain things that we can learn from. It is not only that, we're told to also look at UNEP. UNEP has some frameworks that they work with in looking at targets and indicators. can we look at something from there? It also talked about UNDP. It talked about the World Bank. It talked about quite a number, about 20 different frameworks that were cited as areas where we can actually consult. Remember, it was about sources of information. So here we can actually learn from some of these. And then it also even talks about the IPCC itself, the work of the IPCC. The IPCC works with a number of targets and indicators. And so we can also look at the IPCC work and then see what we can actually learn from. So this is what brought about the mention of the Sendai framework.
Thank you, Doc.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you so much. All too soon, we are about to wrapping up our session with Dr. NP. By way of an icebreaker, I'm going to put some of our participants on the spot here. I would like to call on Mr. Foster of Ministry of Finance to give us the vernacular word for adaptation and mitigation in his language, so we can understand how difficult this situation is. Hello. Is Foster with us? Hello. Okay, it looks like he's a little engaged. So I'll ask Daniela Naba. Daniela Naba, can you kindly give us the vernacular word for adaptation or mitigation in your language? Okay, so it looks like all our participants are kind of engaged right now.
Are you sure they are engaged? Are you sure they are engaged? They are not.
You don't know the answer.
You know, so in my own local language, it's not, it's a phenomena you would have to describe with several languages. There's no one word to describe adaptation or mitigation. And so when you talk about inculcating local knowledge into the global adaptation goals, we can imagine it's such a Herculean task to achieve. And so these all play out the dynamics on how we would have to all input into the attainment of the global adaptation goals with our own specific variations. If you take Ghana alone, it's quite a lot. Is there anyone who wants to also give a submission on what adaptation or mitigation sounds like in their language?
Yeah, so I was thinking that mitigation can be, say, a better.
Can you speak up, please? We can hear you.
Okay, so I was thinking that mitigation can be a better nasty. Or what do you think? Say, a better nasty.
Come again. You're not quite clear. I'm not getting you too well.
Okay, so this one translating mitigation fee.
Yes,
So I'm saying that mitigation can be say pregnancy.
Right. Okay, that's for the P version. Pardon me, I don't speak P too well. All right, I think I see
you speak P too well. You are my student. Don't say you don't speak P too well.
Can I hear Emanuela's hand is up? Can I hear you, Emanuela?
Oh, sorry, let me put my hand down. I don't know.
All right, okay, all right. So all too soon, we've come to the end of our questioning and answering session. We are very grateful to Dr. NP for his submissions and really educating us on the subjects of global goal adaptation. We'll be doing this continuously every week from now. And so our next session would be on loss and damage, and it would be led by one of our experts, Evelyn Addo. This will be our first female on the panel, so you guys stay tuned and see what the ladies have got for you. Okay, and this is also for you to also just take note that most of the recordings that we are taking will be shared in the WhatsApp group that we have created, just by way of recap if you missed out on some of the sessions. And then that would be it. We would also be giving out certificates of participation at the end of this session by way of encouraging those who have taken some time off to join us here to make this session a success. And to Dr. Enki, I would call on Hussein to kindly give us the vote of thanks for him dedicating his time to be able to give us the splendid display of knowledge in such a gray area. Hello. Hello. Oh. Okay, it looks like he's not
But
on board with it.
maybe before whoever comes in to give the vote of thanks, I think I also want to thank you and your team for the opportunity to have this platform. I like such platforms because it is one of the best ways to also communicate what is happening elsewhere to ourselves and then also get feedback. And so I don't joke with this kind of opportunities. And so I want to thank you so much. I was in a meeting, but I had to cancel that one and come and then stay somewhere to be able to handle this one. So I'm so grateful. At least I saw over 50 people joining, and that speaks a lot to us. So thank you for providing this space and continue this good work for the others to also come in there. Yeah, thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Enchi. Coming from you, it means loads to me and my team. We are very grateful. Okay, so we would also post most of these recordings on our social media handles on Facebook and on LinkedIn for recap, like I said earlier on. And thank you all for coming and being here. It's an honor. All right, so you guys all have a good night, have a good afternoon, and good morning, wherever you joined us from, and thank you.
Thank you too. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.